what really unfolds when a faithful bishop suddenly finds himself cut off by the very leader he once stood beside. The recent fallout between Bishop Joel Tudman and Bishop Henry Fernandez has rattled the faith community, and at last, the silence has been shattered. But what Tudman now reveals about his unexpected termination could shake the very foundation of what we thought we understood about church leadership, power, and loyalty. Stay with me, because the truth behind this story is far more layered than anyone ever imagined. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a situation that has the faith community buzzing with questions, tension, and disbelief. The dismissal of Bishop Joel Tudman by Bishop Henry Fernandez is not just another dispute inside the church. This moment marks a turning point, exposing just how fragile relationships can be at the highest levels of ministry leadership, and what truly happens when trust and loyalty are pushed to the breaking point. For months, speculation floated around in silence. Rumors spread, but no answers surfaced. Many asked themselves, why would a man with Tubman's stature and influence suddenly be removed? What could possibly have driven Bishop Henry Fernandez, a respected figure in his own right, to take such a drastic step? Well, Bishop Tubman has finally broken his silence, and his words draw a picture very different from what most of us were led to believe. In this video, we're going to break down the timeline of events, dig into the behind-the-scenes tensions, and uncover details you won't find anywhere else. And let me give you a warning. What you're about to hear might completely shift how you view these two men of God, their ministries, and the unseen battles of power that take place far away from the pulpit. So hold on tight, because this isn't just another headline. This is a story of ambition, betrayal, and the heavy cost of silence that has finally been shattered. Trust me, you won't want to miss the twists that surface as we dig deeper into the facts. But before we get into the shocking termination itself, it's important to first understand who Bishop Joel Tudman really is and why his voice carries so much weight in the world of faith and leadership. Joel Tudman's journey has been nothing short of remarkable. He wasn't born into a mega ministry or handed influence on a silver platter. His story is one of perseverance, discipline, and an unwavering pursuit of God's calling. From the earliest days of his ministry, Tubman stood out not just for his powerful preaching, but for the way he genuinely connected with everyday people. His messages weren't simply about lofty theology. They spoke of survival, resilience, and finding faith through real-life struggles. That's what made people listen. That's what made people trust him. Over time, Tubman's platform expanded. He became a voice for those who felt unseen, a preacher unafraid to speak with honesty about both victories and hardships. His authenticity drew crowds, and his leadership made him an invaluable asset to any ministry he joined. Eventually, his journey intersected with Bishop Henry Fernandez, a man equally respected in the sphere of church leadership. To many, this partnership looked like destiny itself. Fernandez had influence, a long-standing reputation, and a ministry network stretching across nations. Tubman brought fresh energy, new vision, and a unique bond with younger generations of believers. Together, they seemed unstoppable. Yet this is where the story begins to take a darker turn. Behind the polished sermons, the packed sanctuaries, and the bright smiles on stage, tensions were quietly building, tensions most people never noticed. While the public celebrated what appeared to be a powerful alliance, cracks had already started forming in private.
As we step into the next chapter, we'll take a closer look at the rise of Bishop Henry Fernandez and how his leadership style may have collided with Tubman's vision, ultimately setting the stage for a shocking dismissal no one could have predicted. To fully grasp the weight of this controversy, we have to examine the man at the very center of this decision, Bishop Henry Fernandez. For decades, Fernandez has stood as a towering presence in ministry, widely recognized as the senior pastor of the Faith Center in Florida. From modest beginnings, he built his church into one of the most influential ministries in the entire region. Under his guidance, the Faith Center became more than a sanctuary of worship. It grew into a spiritual hub, a cultural landmark, and a place of empowerment for thousands of believers. His voice has resonated across conferences, television broadcasts, and international platforms, earning him respect not only throughout the United States but also worldwide. Fernandez's style of leadership has often been defined as firm, visionary, and unwavering. He has always been a man of order, someone who prizes structure and loyalty above everything else. For many, This has been the cornerstone of his success. He understands how to build, how to organize, and how to keep a ministry running with excellence. Yet, like any strong leadership approach, it has also drawn its share of criticism. Some have argued that his demand for loyalty can sometimes feel more like control, and that his intense focus on safeguarding the institution leaves little space for differing voices within his inner circle. When Bishop Joel Tudman entered Fernandez's fold, the partnership appeared flawless, two dynamic leaders pushing each other toward greater heights. Tubman was younger, full of energy, and deeply connected to the emerging generation of believers. Fernandez was seasoned, established, and carried decades of influence. On the surface, they looked like the perfect blend of tradition and innovation. But in ministry, as in life, power dynamics are rarely that straightforward. Tubman's rising popularity, his raw and unfiltered preaching, and his remarkable ability to connect with people through authenticity may have slowly begun to overshadow Fernandez's more traditional leadership style. For some leaders, such growing influence under their roof can feel like a challenge, even if it was never meant to be one. Still, Fernandez held the reins. His decisions determined the faith center's direction, and his reputation alone could open doors or close them. That's precisely why the eventual dismissal of Bishop Tubman came as such a shock. For Fernandez to take such a drastic step meant it wasn't just about a minor disagreement. It was a statement, a clear message to Tubman, to the church, and to everyone watching from the outside. But here's the part that refuses to fade from conversation. What exactly went on behind those closed doors that drove Fernandez to release someone as valuable as Tubman? Was it simply a clash of visions, or was there something far deeper? Politics, ambition, or perhaps even personal betrayal? In the next chapter, we'll start piecing together the chain of events that ultimately led to Tubman's termination. And trust me, the details will raise more questions than answers. Every major fallout leaves behind a trail, and in the case of Bishop Joel Tubman and Bishop Henry Fernandez, the road to termination was not laid in a single moment. It began with gradual, almost imperceptible shifts that slowly grew into undeniable fractures. Let's rewind for a moment. At the start, Tubman's arrival at the Faith Center was nothing short of electrifying. People were drawn to his passion, his unfiltered honesty, and his rare ability to bridge generational divides. Younger believers felt seen and understood through him, while older members respected his unwavering devotion to Scripture. In many ways, Tubman infused Fernandez's ministry with fresh energy, complementing Fernandez's seasoned leadership by bringing in a new vision. But as weeks stretched into months, murmurs began to ripple through the congregation. Some whispered of underlying power struggles. Others noticed differences in how Tubman's sermons were received compared to Fernandez's. Was the younger bishop beginning to outshine his mentor? Was Fernandez perhaps feeling the pressure of sharing the spotlight? No one could say for certain, but behind closed doors, the tension was unmistakable. Reports suggest that disagreements started to surface. Tubman allegedly pushed for new outreach initiatives that would bring the church closer to underserved communities. Fernandez, however, preferred strategies that preserved the prestige and carefully structured reputation the Faith Center had built over decades. These weren't minor differences, they were collisions of philosophy, of vision, and ultimately of ego. The first visible fracture appeared when Tubman was discreetly sidelined from key projects. Insiders noticed he was no longer given the same prominence on stage during major events. His once celebrated voice began to feel muted. To the outside world, it may have looked like a simple shift in focus. But to those paying closer attention, it was a clear signal that something was changing. By the time rumors of strained communication leaked out, the writing was already on the wall. According to accounts circulating in ministry circles, Tubman felt blindsided and unsure of his standing and uncertain if his contributions were still valued. Fernandez, on the other hand, reportedly doubled down on his resolve, tightening his grip and ensuring every decision within the church's hierarchy flowed through him. And then came the moment no one expected. Without warning, without explanation, Bishop Joel Tudman was abruptly terminated. The announcement sent shockwaves through the congregation and far beyond. Questions erupted instantly. Why now? Why in this manner? And why with so little explanation? But perhaps the most haunting part of this entire timeline wasn't the termination itself, it was the silence that followed. Weeks turned into months, And while rumors circulated wildly, neither Fernandez nor Tubman issued a full public statement. That silence only deepened speculation, leaving the church divided, supporters frustrated, and the wider faith community desperate for clarity. Just as many began to assume the truth might never surface, Bishop Tubman finally broke his silence. And what he revealed about his departure wasn't merely about losing a position, it was about the behind-the-scenes realities, the pressures no one talks about, and the heavy entanglement of ministry with politics and power. In the next chapter, we'll unpack exactly what Tubman said when he spoke out for the very first time, and why his words may forever reshape how this story is remembered in the months to come. All anyone could do was speculate. Faithful members whispered in pews, leaders exchanged hushed words behind closed doors, and social media filled with endless theories about what had really happened. Yet through it all, Bishop Joel Tudman stayed, quiet, refusing to fuel the storm with any rushed statement. And then at last he spoke. When Tubman broke his silence, it wasn't with rage or reckless accusations. Instead, his words carried a measured calm laced with disappointment, yet grounded in the grace of a man who still honored his calling. But don't mistake his restraint for softness. What he revealed was more than enough to leave people stunned. He began by describing the how of his termination. According to Tubman, the manner in which it happened was abrupt, sudden, and void of the dialogue or mutual respect you would expect between two seasoned leaders who had shared a platform for years. For someone who had poured his loyalty, energy, and vision into the faith center, the lack of communication cut deeper than the termination itself. Tubman went further, alluding to the atmosphere behind the scenes. He described an environment where decisions were made unilaterally, where his voice and sometimes even his very presence felt diminished. Without pointing fingers outright, he painted a portrait of serving in a place where loyalty was demanded, but rarely returned. For anyone who has worked under strong leadership, his words struck a nerve, because what happens when your faithfulness is met not with partnership but with silence and dismissal? He also opened up about something many hadn't considered, the emotional toll. Not only on him, but on his family and close supporters. Ministry, after all, isn't just about the leaders on stage. It's also about the people behind them, the ones who feel the weight of transition when everything begins to crumble. Tubman's testimony shed light on the ripple effects of church politics, reminding us that behind every headline is a family quietly navigating private pain. But then came the line that stopped everyone in their tracks. Tubman said, "Sometimes what looks like rejection is really God's redirection." With those words, he reframed the entire narrative. He was no longer just the bishop who had been dismissed. He became the man who refused to let termination define his story. His silence had not been weakness, it had been preparation. When he finally spoke, his message wasn't only about what was done to him, but about how God was positioning him for something greater. That perspective sparked a wave of reaction. Supporters rallied to his side, interpreting his words as both a declaration of independence and a subtle critique of Fernandez's leadership. Others, however, wondered, was this truly just about redirection? Or was Tubman carefully choosing his words to prevent a deeper conflict from erupting in public? And here's where the story gets even more intriguing. In breaking his silence, Tubman didn't only reflect on the past, he hinted at his future. A future that might not just redefine his own ministry, but potentially reshape the way people view leadership, loyalty, and legacy in the modern church. But before we uncover what's next for him, there's still one more layer to peel back. Because while Tubman's words brought clarity, they also raised fresh questions. Why did Bishop Fernandez remain silent in the face of Tubman's revelations? Was it dignity, a calculated strategy, or something else entirely? In every controversy, there are two sides. And while Bishop Joel Tudman eventually opened up about his journey, one question lingered heavily in the air. Where was Bishop Henry Fernandez? From the very moment news of Tubman's termination surfaced, Fernandez's silence became almost as loud as Tubman's eventual words. In leadership, silence can often serve as a powerful tool. It can safeguard reputations, prevent conflict from escalating further, or project strength in the face of criticism. Yet in this case, it only deepened the mystery. Let's not forget Fernandez is no small name in the faith world. His decades of influence, his global connections, and his image as a man of order made people expect him to speak up, to clarify or at the very least to offer words of closure to a stunned congregation. Instead, what followed was nothing. No statement. No explanation. Just emptiness where answers were expected. Why? Some insiders suggest Fernandez's silence is intentional, a strategy. By refusing to engage in any public back and forth, he positions himself as the composed leader who won't be dragged into controversy. In that interpretation, silence isn't weakness, it's control. It's his way of saying, I don't owe anyone an explanation. Others, however, see it in another light. They argue that silence creates fertile ground for speculation. In the absence of clarity, rumors grow. Members of the church have been left piecing together fragments, relying on whispers, secondhand accounts, and online chatter instead of hearing directly from the man at the center. And for a spiritual leader, whose words have guided thousands, choosing not to address his flock directly has raised questions, disappointment, and even frustration. But let's not ignore another possibility: silence as protection. Church politics are messy, and when top leaders clash, financial, legal, and organizational stakes often loom large. Could Fernandez's silence be less about indifference and more about shielding the ministry from further scrutiny? Could he be holding back not because he doesn't care, but because speaking too much could trigger consequences greater than most can imagine? Still, one fact cannot be denied: Fernandez's absence has created a vacuum. And into that vacuum, the narrative has been filled almost entirely by Tubman's account. In the court of public opinion, when one side speaks while the other remains silent, perception shifts dramatically. That's where the tension lies. For Fernandez's supporters, his silence represents wisdom, a refusal to dignify negativity. For his critics, it reeks of avoidance and unwillingness to confront the truth. Either way, his silence hasn't killed the conversation. If anything, it has kept it alive, fueling more debate about what really happened. And here's where it becomes even more intriguing: silence never lasts forever. History shows us that eventually, whether through a sermon, a carefully crafted statement, or even through his actions, Fernandez will have to address the situation. He cannot stay quiet indefinitely. And when he does finally speak, it could completely alter the direction of this story. But as we wait for that inevitable moment, another question now rises to the surface. What happens to Bishop Joel Tudman? Where does he go from here? And how does he rebuild not just his ministry, but also his identity in the eyes of the faith community? Because as much as this controversy has revolved around his termination, it may ultimately be remembered for his transformation. When one door closes, another often opens. And for Bishop Joel Tudman, what looked like an ending may have been the spark of an entirely new beginning. In breaking his silence, Tubman made one thing clear: rejection does not define him. Rather than framing it as rejection, he described the ordeal as redirection. And if history shows us anything about leaders who face setbacks, it's that many of them turn those very seasons into stepping stones towards something greater. Already, whispers within ministry circles hint that Tubman is preparing for a fresh chapter of leadership, one that may take him beyond the walls of the Faith Center. With his natural charisma, his gift for bridging generations, and the loyal base he's cultivated over the years, Tubman carries every ingredient needed to launch a ministry entirely his own. But what form might that take? Some suggest he could plant his own church, establishing roots in a city where he can pour fresh vision into a new congregation. Others speculate he may lean harder into conferences, digital platforms, and online outreach, connecting with global audiences who crave the authenticity and fire he brings. And given the times we're in, where virtual ministry often reaches further than physical buildings, this might be the perfect opportunity for him to build something far larger than anyone anticipates. Naturally, challenges will follow. Rebuilding after a public termination is never simple. Critics may brand him as the bishop who was dismissed. Others may question if he truly has the resources, stability, or backing to stand on his own. Yet Tubman's greatest strength has always been resilience. And if his own words are to be believed, this chapter isn't about proving his worth to people. It's about fulfilling the assignment he believes God has placed before him. Meanwhile, the faith community watches with anticipation. Will this controversy fade into history as just another church dispute, or will it mark the very moment that launched Bishop Joel Tudman into the most impactful season of his ministry? The saga of Bishop Joel Tudman and Bishop Henry Fernandez. is not simply about termination, it's about leadership, power, loyalty, and the hidden struggles behind the pulpit. Tubman's rise, his abrupt dismissal, and his eventual choice to break the silence remind us that even in sacred spaces, the very human dynamics of ambition and conflict remain at play. For Fernandez, silence continues to be his weapon of choice, keeping the world guessing about his real motives and intentions. For Tubman, speaking out became an act of reclaiming his dignity, his voice, and ultimately, his destiny. And for the rest of us, this story stands as a sobering reminder. Leadership isn't about titles alone. It's about how you treat people, how you navigate conflict, and how you respond when the spotlight shifts away from you. So let me ask you, was Tubman's dismissal truly about vision and direction, or was there something deeper beneath it? Do you view Fernandez's silence as wisdom or as avoidance? And most importantly, what do you believe lies ahead for Bishop Joel Tudman? Share your perspective in the comments below. I'd love to hear your take. And if this video gave you something to think about, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth coverage of trending and controversial stories within the faith community. Because trust me, the stories behind the headlines are far from over.